Help us reach 1,000 subscribers on the new channel, Cheating Tales Lab. We hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. James Kavanagh's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the armrest as his flight descended into Dulles International Airport. He wasn't supposed to be here, not yet. The tech conference in Tokyo had another 3 days to run, but that text message on Victoria's phone, it gnawed at him, an itch he couldn't scratch. Meeting confirmed for 2 a.m. You know where. He'd seen it by chance, a notification popping up while Victoria was in the shower. Work-related, she'd said when he'd asked. But at 2 a.m., something didn't add up. As James collected his luggage and hailed a taxi, his mind raced through possibilities. Was he overreacting, letting his imagination run wild? But years of coding had honed his ability to spot patterns, to sense when something was off. And this felt very off indeed. The cab pulled up to their house, a sleek, modern structure that James had painstakingly outfitted with the latest smart home technology. He paid the driver and stood for a moment, taking in the familiar facade. Everything looked normal, peaceful, even, but as he approached the front door, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Silence. That was what hit him first as he stepped inside. No cheerful greeting from Alexa, nowhere of the Roomba making its rounds. James had programmed the house to come alive when either of them returned home. So why was it so quiet? "Victoria," he called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. No response. James moved through the living room, his footsteps unnaturally loud on the hardwood floors. The kitchen was empty, the home office undisturbed. He was about to head upstairs when he heard it. A faint splash, followed by a low murmur of voices. His heart pounding, James ascended the stairs, each step measured and silent. The master bedroom door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the hallway. Another splash, a soft giggle. James pushed the door open. Through the steam billowing from the ensuite bathroom, he saw them. Victoria and Gregory Stern, her business partner, entwined in the oversized spa tub. Her head was thrown back, exposing the elegant line of her throat. Gregory's mouth was at her neck, one hand tangled in her hair. For a moment, James couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The scene before him was so surreal, so at odds with everything he thought he knew, that his brain struggled to process it. Then, with a clinical detachment that surprised even him, James began to catalog details. The empty bottle of 1982 Chateau Lafite on the floor. Victoria's favorite perfume mingling with the scent of jasmine bath oil. The way Gregory's wedding ring glinted as his fingers traced Victoria's collarbone. In that moment, as the carefully constructed image of his marriage shattered around him, James felt something inside him harden. The hurt, the betrayal. He packed it all away, sealing it behind a wall of icy determination. They hadn't noticed him yet, too lost in their passion. James allowed himself one more moment to burn the image into his memory. Then, face expressionless, he stepped fully into the room. "Well," James said, his voice flat and emotionless, "isn't this cozy?" Victoria's eyes flew open, widening in shock as she saw James standing there. She scrambled to cover herself, nearly slipping in the tub. "James, you're home early." Gregory, to his credit, didn't try to pretend this was anything other than what it was. He met James's gaze, a hint of a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Come to join the party, Jimmy." James said nothing, his silence more unnerving than any shouting could have been. He simply stood there, taking in the scene with cold, calculating eyes. Victoria, recovering from her initial shock, tried a different tack. Her voice took on a mocking tone, eyes narrowing. "What's the matter, James? Nothing to say? God, you're so boring, so predictable. No wonder I had to find excitement elsewhere." "You should thank us, really," Gregory chimed in, his smugness palpable. "We've livened up your dull little life." Still, James remained silent. His lack of reaction seemed to unsettle them both. They had clearly expected an emotional outburst, tears, rage. Anything but this icy calm. Without a word, James reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With a few quick taps, he activated an app he'd installed months ago, just in case. Just to be prepared. The bathroom's hidden cameras whirred to life, streaming the scene before him to a secure server. "What are you doing?" Victoria snapped, a note of uncertainty creeping into her voice. James didn't answer. Instead, he initiated a video call. The phone rang twice before a familiar face appeared on the screen. "James," Charlotte's voice came through, tinged with concern. "Is everything all right?" Wordlessly, James turned the phone so Charlotte could see her husband and his lover in the tub. The color drained from Charlotte's face as the reality of what she was seeing sank in. Her mouth opened in a silent scream of anguish. Gregory lunged to the phone, but James was faster. He ended the call and slipped the device back into his pocket. "You bastard," Gregory snarled, all pretense of suave confidence gone. Victoria's earlier bravado had evaporated. "James, please. We can talk about this. It doesn't have to." James cut her off with a look, his eyes cold and hard. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the bathroom, leaving Victoria and Gregory to stew in the wreckage of their exposed affair. James moved through the house with mechanical precision, gathering his essential belongings. Clothes, toiletries, important documents, all went into a suitcase with methodical efficiency. His mind was clear, focused solely on the task at hand. He could hear Victoria calling his name, her voice growing more frantic with each repetition. The sound of bare feet slapping against hardwood told him she was following him from room to room. "James, please," she begged, her earlier mockery replaced by desperation. "Let me explain. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." James continued packing, not sparing her a glance. "There's nothing to explain." "We can work this out," Victoria insisted, grabbing his arm. "I love you. We can get past this." James shook off her grip, his voice devoid of any warmth or emotion. "I'm filing for divorce. You have until the end of the day to leave the house." Victoria's face crumpled. No, you can't. Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't care," James replied, zipping up his suitcase. As James made his way downstairs, Gregory appeared at the bottom of the steps, hastily dressed but still dripping water onto the floor. His earlier smugness was gone, replaced by barely contained rage. "You think you've won something here?" Gregory spat. "You're nothing. A pathetic little man who can't satisfy his wife." James set down his suitcase and pulled out his phone again. Gregory tensed, clearly expecting another call. Instead, James pulled up his contacts and dialed a number. "Owen, it's James. I need your help." Owen Mercer's voice came through, tinny but clear. "What's going on?" "I'm getting divorced. I need to secure my assets and prepare for a legal battle." There was a pause, then Owen's voice, sharp and focused. "I'm on it. Come to my office. We'll get started right away." James ended the call and picked up his suitcase. He looked at Victoria, then at Gregory, his face an impassive mask. "I'd start packing if I were you, Victoria. You don't have much time." With that, he walked out the front door, leaving behind the shattered remains of his marriage and the life he'd thought he knew. As James drove to Owen's office, his mind was already racing ahead, plotting his next moves. The pain and betrayal were there, simmering beneath the surface, but he refused to let them control him. Instead, he channeled that energy into a cold, hard determination. They thought he was weak, predictable, boring. Well, he would show them just how wrong they were. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. James Kavanaugh sat in his temporary office, a small, windowless room in the back of Owen's law firm. The space was cluttered with stacks of legal documents and financial records. A half-empty cup of cold coffee sat forgotten on the edge of the desk. It had been 3 weeks since he'd walked in on Victoria and Gregory, 3 weeks of sleepless nights and endless paperwork. But now, finally, it was time to go on the offensive. James picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd been given by Owen. After 2 rings, a crisp, professional voice answered. Evelyn Pierce speaking. Ms. Pierce, this is James Kavanaugh. I was told you're the best at what you do. There was a brief pause. That depends on what you need done, Mr. Kavanaugh. James leaned back in his chair, his voice steady. I need you to dig into every aspect of Gregory Stern's life, his business dealings, his personal affairs, his past. I want to know everything, especially anything he's tried to keep hidden. I see. Evelyn's tone remained neutral. And may I ask why you're interested in Mr. Stern? Let's just say he's made himself my enemy. I intend to make him regret that decision. Another pause, longer this time. Then, very well, Mr. Kavanaugh. I'll take the case. But I should warn you, this kind of deep dive can be expensive. James allowed himself a small, money isn't an issue. Just find me what I need. After ending the call, James sat back, his mind racing. Evelyn Pierce was just the first step. He had other moves to make, other pieces to put into play. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Charlotte, Gregory's soon-to-be ex-wife. Can we meet? I think we need to talk. James stared at the message for a long moment. He hadn't spoken to Charlotte since that fateful video call. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to focus solely on his own vendetta. But another part, the part that still remembered what it was like to be betrayed and alone, made him type out a reply. Coffee shop on 4th Street. 1 hour. Charlotte was already there when James arrived, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. She looked up as he approached, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. James, she said softly, thank you for coming. He slid into the seat across from her, ordering a black coffee from the hovering waitress. What did you want to talk about, Charlotte? She took a deep breath. I filed for divorce, but I don't want to just walk away. Not after what they did to us. I want to help you bring Gregory down. James studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, he nodded slowly. All right, what did you have in mind? Charlotte leaned forward, her voice low and intense. I've been Gregory's wife for 15 years. I know things, James. Things about his business practices, his clients, his indiscretions. I think, together, we might be able to do some real damage. A spark of interest lit in James's eyes. Tell me more. For the next hour, Charlotte laid out everything she knew about Gregory's less-than-ethical business dealings. By the time they finished, James had pages of notes and a growing sense of anticipation. As they stood to leave, Charlotte caught James's arm. There's one more thing, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I found some old financial records in Gregory's home office. I think he might have been involved in some kind of embezzlement scheme years ago, before we were married. James's eyebrows shot up. Do you have proof? Charlotte shook her head. Not concrete proof, no, but enough to make me suspicious. Maybe your investigator could look into it. James nodded, his mind already racing with the possibilities. I'll have her check it out. Thank you, Charlotte. This could be exactly what we need. As he watched Charlotte walk away, James felt a twinge of something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. Back in his temporary office, James began to formulate his plan. The pieces were falling into place. Evelyn Pierce digging into Gregory's past, Charlotte's insider knowledge, and now, the possibility of a long-buried financial scandal. James picked up his phone and opened a secure messaging app. It was time to start leaking some of the information he'd gathered. Nothing too damaging. Not yet. Just enough to get people talking, to plant the seeds of doubt in the minds of Gregory's clients and colleagues. He started with a video from the spa tub, carefully edited to obscure the more explicit details, but leaving no doubt as to the participants' identities. He sent it to a few key people in Gregory's social circle, using an anonymous email account. Next came some of the information Charlotte had provided about Gregory's questionable business practices. This went to a select group of Gregory's clients, again through untraceable channels. As he worked, James felt a cold satisfaction settling over him. This was just the beginning. Soon, Gregory's carefully constructed world would begin to crumble, piece by piece. Days turned into weeks as James divided his time between working with Owen on the divorce proceedings and coordinating with Evelyn and Charlotte on their investigation into Gregory. Evelyn proved to be worth every penny of her exorbitant fee. She dug up dirt on Gregory that even Charlotte hadn't known about. Offshore accounts, shell companies, a pattern of behavior that suggested a long history of financial manipulation and fraud. But it was when she started looking into Gregory's past that things really got interesting. "Mr. Kavanaugh," Evelyn's voice crackled over the phone. "I think I found something you'll want to see." An hour later, James sat in Evelyn's sparse, efficient office, staring at the documents spread out before him. "It took some doing," Evelyn said, her tone matter-of-fact. "He buried it deep, but there's no doubt. Early in his career, Gregory Stern was involved in a massive embezzlement scheme. We're talking millions of dollars, siphoned off from client accounts and funneled through a series of shell companies." James leafed through the papers, his eyes widening as he took in the details. "This is incredible. How did he get away with it?" Evelyn's lips thinned. "A combination of luck, skill, and what I suspect was some well-placed bribery. But the evidence is there, if you know where to look." James sat back, his mind racing. This was it, the silver bullet he'd been looking for. With this information, he could destroy Gregory completely. But he had to be smart about it, strategic. If he moved too quickly, Gregory might find a way to wiggle out of it. "What do you recommend?" he asked Evelyn. She considered for a moment. An anonymous tip to the authorities would be the safest bet. Provide them with enough evidence to start an investigation, but not so much that they question where it came from. James nodded slowly. "Do it, and keep digging. I want to know everything there is to know about this scheme." As he left Evelyn's office, James felt a surge of adrenaline. The game was truly on now. Over the next few days, James watched with satisfaction as his plan began to bear fruit. The leaked video and business information had done their job. Whispers were spreading through Gregory's social and professional circles. People were starting to ask questions, to look at him with suspicion rather than admiration. And then, the coup de grace. The anonymous tip to the authorities about Gregory's past embezzlement hit like a bombshell. James was having coffee with Charlotte when the news broke. They watched on the cafe's TV as a grim-faced reporter detailed the allegations against Gregory Stern, prominent businessman and pillar of the community. "Officials have confirmed that Mr. Stern's assets have been frozen pending a full investigation," the reporter said. Sources close to the matter suggest that the scope of the alleged fraud is staggering, potentially reaching into the tens of millions of dollars. Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth. "My God," she whispered. "I knew he was corrupt, but this." James said nothing, but a small, satisfied smile played at the corners of his mouth. He thought of Victoria, wondering how she was taking the news, if she was regretting her choices yet. As the days passed, Gregory's fall from grace accelerated. His clients abandoned him in droves. The stock price of his company plummeted. Every news outlet in the city seemed to be running stories about the great Gregory Stern and his spectacular downfall. James watched it all unfold with a detached sort of interest. He felt no joy in Gregory's destruction, no sense of triumph, just a cold, empty satisfaction that justice was finally being served. The final nail in the coffin came with the divorce settlements. Thanks to Owen's skillful maneuvering and the mountain of evidence James had accumulated, Victoria was left with a fraction of what she'd expected. James sat in Owen's office, reviewing the final documents. "She's really agreed to this?" he asked, somewhat incredulous. Owen nodded, a satisfied smile on his face. She didn't have much choice. Between the prenup and the evidence of her infidelity, not to mention her association with Gregory's scandal, she's lucky to be getting anything at all. James leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. It was over. Really, truly over. As if on cue, his phone rang. It was his family's lawyer. "Mr. Kavanaugh, I have some news about your grandmother's estate. The legal dispute has finally been resolved. You've inherited a substantial sum." James listened in stunned silence as the lawyer rattled off figures. It was more money than he'd ever imagined having. As he ended the call, James's mind was already racing with possibilities. He thought about the ideas he'd been mulling over for a new tech startup, one focused on cybersecurity. With this inheritance, he could make it a reality. Over the next few months, James threw himself into building his new company. He hired the best minds in the industry, developed cutting-edge security systems, and quickly gained a reputation as a rising star in the tech world. Contracts started rolling in, including some from major corporations. James found himself working long hours, but for the first time in a long time, he felt truly alive. He was building something meaningful, something that could help protect others from the kind of digital vulnerabilities he'd exploited in his revenge against Gregory. As his business thrived, James couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. The pain of betrayal had been transformed into a driving force, propelling him to heights he'd never imagined possible. And Victoria? Last he'd heard, she was struggling to maintain even a shadow of her former lifestyle. The modest apartment she now called home was a far cry from the luxurious house they'd once shared. James Kavanaugh stood across the street from a modest apartment building, his eyes fixed on a particular window on the third floor. Behind that window lived Victoria, his ex-wife, now struggling to maintain even a semblance of her former lifestyle. But James wasn't here to reminisce or gloat. He was here on business. "So, this is the place?" asked the realtor standing beside him. James nodded. "Yes, I'll take it. But I don't want to buy. Let's discuss a long-term lease." The realtor looked confused. "A lease? But sir, with your resources, surely purchasing would be more." "A lease," James repeated firmly. "And I'll need some renovations done. Specifically, I want the entire street-facing wall converted into a high-tech, interactive display." The realtor's eyes widened as James outlined his plans. When he finished, she stammered, "Mr. Kavanaugh, it seems rather unusual." James allowed himself a small, cold smile. "Let's get the paperwork started." Over the next few weeks, the building across from Victoria's apartment underwent a dramatic transformation. The entire facade was converted into a massive, state-of-the-art digital billboard. But this was no ordinary advertisement space. Every week, the display changed, each iteration more personal and damning than the last. One week, it played carefully edited clips from the spa tub surveillance video on a loop. The next, it displayed blown-up text messages between Victoria and Gregory, their betrayal laid bare for all to see. As time went on, the content became even more specific. Snippets from the divorce proceedings, bank statements showing Victoria's dwindling finances. Each display was a stark reminder of her fall from grace, impossible to ignore every time she left her apartment. From his office across town, James monitored the billboard impact through discreet cameras. He watched as Victoria's composure crumbled day by day. She started leaving her apartment less and less, clearly rattled by the constant, evolving reminder of her mistakes. The billboard became the talk of the neighborhood. Passers-by would stop and stare, pointing and whispering. Victoria's attempts to have it removed all failed. James had ensured every legal base was covered. As weeks turned into months, James observed the toll his psychological warfare was taking. Victoria's once vibrant social life withered away. Friends stopped visiting. She lost weight, her appearance growing haggard and unkempt on the rare occasions she ventured outside. James felt no joy in watching her suffer, no sense of triumph or satisfaction. This wasn't about happiness for him. It was about justice, cold and unrelenting. While the billboard continued its relentless assault on Victoria's psyche, James focused on expanding his business empire. His cybersecurity startup had taken off beyond his wildest expectations, securing contracts with major corporations and government agencies. It was at a tech conference in San Francisco that James met Emily Hawthorne. She was presenting a keynote on global scaling strategies for tech startups, and her insights immediately caught James's attention. After her talk, James approached her. "Ms. Hawthorne, James Kavanaugh, I found your presentation fascinating." Emily smiled, her brown eyes warm and intelligent. "Mr. Kavanaugh, I've heard a lot about your work in cybersecurity. It's impressive how quickly you've established yourself in the field." They fell into an easy conversation, discussing industry trends and sharing experiences. James found himself drawn to Emily's sharp mind and grounded perspective. She had a way of cutting through the noise and getting to the heart of complex issues. As the conference progressed, James and Emily spent more time together. They attended sessions, debated new technologies, and shared late-night conversations over coffee. James found himself opening up to her in a way he hadn't with anyone in years. "You've been through a lot," Emily said one evening after James had shared some of his past. "But look at what you built from it. That's truly remarkable, James." Her words stayed with him, sparking a realization. He had focused so much on his revenge, on tearing down those who had wronged him, that he neglected to fully appreciate what he created in the process. Inspired by this new perspective, James began to shift his focus. He started mentoring young entrepreneurs, sharing his experiences and insights. He hosted workshops and seminars, becoming a respected figure not just in the tech community, but in his local area as well. As his public profile grew, so did his relationship with Emily. They began dating, their shared experiences in the tech world providing a strong foundation. Emily's empathy and emotional intelligence balanced James's more analytical approach, helping him process the lingering pain from his past betrayal. Meanwhile, across town, Charlotte was undergoing her own transformation. Inspired by James's resilience and success, she channeled her pain into advocacy. She established a foundation to support women navigating the legal and emotional challenges of divorce, especially in cases involving betrayal. "I want to help others find the strength I found," Charlotte told James over lunch one day, "to show them that there's life after betrayal, that they can rebuild and thrive." James nodded, a sense of pride washing over him. They had both come so far from those dark days of discovery and heartbreak. Just as James was settling into his new life, balancing his thriving business with his mentorship programs and his deepening relationship with Emily, a new threat emerged. It started with a series of minor security breaches in his company's systems. At first, James dismissed them as routine hacking attempts. But as the attacks grew more sophisticated and targeted, a pattern emerged. "It's Gregory," James told Emily one night, his voice tight with tension. "He's trying to take down my business." Emily's brow furrowed with concern. "I thought he was still dealing with legal troubles." James nodded. "He is. But this reeks of desperation. It's his last attempt to strike back at me." But James had anticipated this move. In the years since his divorce, he had poured his expertise into developing state-of-the-art cybersecurity measures. His company's defenses were virtually impenetrable. As Gregory's attacks intensified, James and his team worked tirelessly to repel them. Not only did they successfully defend against every incursion, but they also managed to trace the attacks back to their source. With the evidence in hand, James didn't hesitate. He turned everything over to the authorities, providing them with a detailed record of Gregory's cyber attacks. The legal consequences were swift and severe. Already on thin ice from his previous financial crimes, Gregory now faced additional charges of cyber terrorism. The court showed no mercy. James sat in the courtroom, his face impassive as the judge delivered the verdict. Gregory Stern, once a titan of industry, was sentenced to a significant prison term for his crimes. As Gregory was led away in handcuffs, his eyes met James's for a brief moment. In that look, James saw the final crumbling of the man who had once seemed so powerful, so untouchable. Outside the courthouse, Emily took James's hand. "It's over," she said softly. "Really over this time." James nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Yes, it is. As they walked away from the courthouse, James reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The betrayal, the pain, the cold fury that had driven him for so long. It all seemed distant now, like a story that had happened to someone else. He had not only avenged the wrongs done to him, but had built something meaningful in the process. His company was thriving, his relationship with Emily was strong and supportive, and he had found a new purpose in mentoring the next generation of entrepreneurs. James squeezed Emily's hand, a genuine smile spreading across his face. For the first time in years, he felt truly free. Free from the shadows of his past. Free to embrace the future he had fought so hard to create. The game was over, and James had won, not just by defeating his enemies, but by becoming something more than he ever thought possible.